The first thing they heard was the bell, thin, cracked, and ringing across cotton fields that never forgot the sound of chains. Before dawn, men poured out of long wooden barracks, boots sinking into damp Mississippi soil. Guards waited on horseback in trucks, rifles resting easy, faces unreadable. The heat hadn't arrived yet, but it would. It always did. This was Parchman Farm, Mississippi State Penitentiary, built on land that once counted human beings as property, and run in a way that made time feel like it had stopped on purpose. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. In the early decades of the 20th century, a rumor traveled faster than court records: get arrested in Mississippi, and you could disappear into Parchman. Not for murder. Not for robbery. For vagrancy. For loitering. For not having proof of work. Most of the men sent here were black, poor, and already trapped by Jim Crow laws that turned everyday survival into a crime. The sentence was never just time. It was labor. Cotton stretched to the horizon like a white sea. Prisoners worked from sunup to sundown, watched by armed guards who enforced quotas with discipline that rarely made it into official reports. Slow down, and you were singled out. Collapse, and you were dragged to the shade, if you were lucky. The state called it rehabilitation. The men living it called it something else entirely. Parchman had a reputation even other prisons whispered about. No walls. No cells in the fields. Just distance, guns, and the certainty that running would end badly. At night, the barracks filled with coughing, groans, and the low murmur of men counting days they didn't believe they'd finish alive. Medical care was scarce. Complaints were dangerous. Silence was survival. Then, one afternoon, the work line stopped. A man went down between the rows. Heat exhaustion, some said. Overwork, others knew. The guards closed ranks. Orders were barked. The bell rang again, too soon. The body was moved out of sight, and the line was told to keep cutting. No report. No questions. Just cotton filling sacks while the sun climbed higher. Inside the camp, word spread anyway. Not about the man's name, names didn't last long here, but about what followed. That the books wouldn't match the head count. That an inspection was coming. That someone up top wanted the fields quiet before outsiders arrived. That night, the lights flickered in the barracks. A guard paced outside longer than usual. And somewhere between the creak of bunk beds and the buzz of insects, a truth settled in. At Parchman, the past wasn't history, it was policy. By morning, the bell would ring again. But some men were already wondering who wouldn't be there to hear it. The secret of Parchman wasn't the labor. It was the accounting. Behind the fields and barracks, in a low office that smelled of ink and sweat, ledgers told a cleaner story than the men outside ever could. Cotton yields. Livestock counts. Labor hours reduced to neat columns. The state praised the prison for being self-sustaining, a word that hid how profit traveled upward while pain stayed in the dirt. Guards understood the math. So did the inmates. Every bail meant the system was working. Every complaint threatened to expose how. Discipline filled the gaps. Shotguns were visible. Whips were not, but their marks didn't need explanation. Men learned the rules fast. Meet the quota. Don't talk to inspectors. Don't fall behind the line. Those who resisted were reassigned to worse details: swamps thick with mosquitoes, ditches where snakes slid through the mud. Psychological pressure did the rest. The guards didn't have to threaten everyone. Just enough. Inside the camps, a quiet hierarchy formed. Some inmates were made trustees, given authority over others in exchange for small protections: dry boots, extra food, a night off the fields. It kept the guards distant and the men divided. Orders came from inmates who knew refusing would cost them more than obedience ever could. Survival blurred into complicity. When rumors of an inspection returned, the pressure spiked. Men were coached on what to say. Injuries were hidden. Sick workers were locked in place until visitors left. The dead man from the fields vanished from conversation, as if silence could erase him from the count. But one thing didn't disappear: the ledgers. A clerk, an inmate with schooling the system hadn't expected, noticed a pattern. Names crossed out. Numbers adjusted after the fact. Days where labor totals stayed perfect despite storms, sickness, and heat that dropped men where they stood. It wasn't just neglect. It was design. Words spread carefully, passed in fragments between bunks and work lines. If the books were false, then the story Parchman told the state was a lie. And lies have enemies. Guards grew tense. Trustees pushed harder. The bell rang earlier, then later, keeping everyone off balance. Fear became routine. Then the inspection arrived. Officials walked the grounds in clean shirts, escorted past the worst fields, past men who had been warned not to look up. The barracks were quiet. The ledgers were presented. Everything balanced. Until one page didn't. A discrepancy. Small. Almost invisible. Enough to raise a question no one wanted asked. That night, the clerk was reassigned. By morning, his bunk was empty. The books were corrected. But the question lingered, because now someone outside Parchman had seen it too. The question didn't bring justice. It brought silence. When the clerk disappeared, the official explanation was simple: transfer. No paperwork surfaced. No destination was named. At Parchman, that was answer enough. The inspection ended without incident, and the state declared the prison efficient, productive, and under control. Cotton kept moving. Money kept flowing. The bell kept ringing. But the ledger page had already done its damage. Outside the farm, journalists and civil rights lawyers began pulling at loose threads: death records that didn't match sentences, medical logs that ended abruptly, labor tallies that never dipped no matter the heat. Survivors who had made it out spoke in fragments, careful and exhausted, describing a place where punishment wasn't the sentence, it was the business model. The truth was bigger than one prison. Parchman was a template. Convict leasing had ended on paper, but prison labor carried it forward under a new name, shielded by law and routine. The 13th Amendment had banned slavery, except as punishment for a crime. In Mississippi, that exception became an industry. Arrests fed the fields. The fields fed the budget. And the men caught in between learned how little the system needed them alive, only working. Pressure finally reached the gates decades later. Lawsuits. Federal scrutiny. Reforms announced in careful language. Some practices changed. Others adapted. Parchman never fully escaped its origins. Even as buildings aged and policies shifted, the plantation logic lingered: control through labor, order through fear, profit through silence. For the men who survived it, the damage didn't end at release. Bodies broke down early. Trust in authority vanished. Memory stayed sharp. They remembered the heat, the rifles, the way the fields seemed endless. They remembered learning that the past wasn't buried, it was enforced. Today, Parchman still stands, its name inseparable from a truth America struggles to face. Mass incarceration didn't replace slavery by accident. It inherited its structure, its incentives, and its blind spots. The uniforms changed. The language softened. The power remained. And somewhere in Mississippi soil, cotton still grows where chains once dragged, a reminder that history doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. It waits, quietly, for someone to count it honestly. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.